Matt and Jen, what's going on? How are we all today?
Goodly, how is you?
Doing good. So a bit of an impromptu stream. Well, I say impromptu, but this is something we've had planned for a couple of days. And interestingly
that we've been
enough,
arguing about on Twitter.
well, but interestingly enough, we organised this before the arguments on Twitter started, which I thought was pretty funny because I sort of we organised this because it's reasonably topical in Australia at the moment. And then all of a sudden, there you two are arguing and fighting with people on Twitter. I'm just like, wow, this is going to be an interesting conversation.
And I mean, it was kind of funny because all the arguments from those of us who have an academic background, scientific academic background, were all the same. And it was all the other side of it that was all like, oh, no, as far as nuclear goes. Because those of us who've actually studied this kind of thing would go, yeah, your concerns aren't valid, and not in the way that you think they are.
Here's where it's interesting, though. It has become, because of what's going on, particularly in Australia at the moment, but I guess the rest of the world, because I mean, a lot of the world's about to sign up to net zero in Glasgow. Interestingly, China, India, and Russia, who are, I believe, numbers 1, 3, and 4 on the pollution scale, won't be going, but the rest of us will be there. So it's something that's an interesting topic, but it seems to be that nuclear has become politicized.
It has been since the 70s, to be fair, or even before that.
Yeah. You could argue ever since they detonated the first bomb, it was
first nuclear bombs. Yeah, it's been politicized
because that was when people realized it was a thing.
But the image of nuclear power being dangerous probably comes back with 3 Mile Island as the first incident, and which really polarized people into the anti-nuke movement because of what happened there with they call it a partial meltdown, and people misunderstand what a meltdown is in terms of reactors. So maybe Matt should cover that because he has done Chernobyl. So,
well, I can tell you what happens when the reactor actually has a full meltdown.
Yeah.
Which
was
not
Chernobyl,
the same thing. But
I mean, really, we don't want any meltdowns.
No, you don't. But
no. And the design of a lot of modern reactors are that if anything goes wrong, they will just shut down. They can't actually end up in a meltdown situation. So I don't know. Did you want us to? We can go for a little bit on how kind of basically nuclear reactors work. So
the first thing, I guess, let's talk about the difference, because I think people think nuclear power and they think of nuclear bombs and sort of that Cold War style of thing. So let's talk about the difference between, I guess, for the simpletons like me out there. Obviously, I know the difference between a bomb and a reactor, but what is the difference between the bomb and the reactor?
Well, you can drop a bomb. No, I mean,
it actually drop a reactor if you were Superman.
It comes down to a matter of balance. When you have a nuclear reactor and you want to get power from it, it's balancing how fast the nuclear reactions occur, those individual little ones, because if you don't, it's a chain reaction. So the very basis of this all relies on, and it doesn't really matter if this is uranium or plutonium, it's roughly the same, well, pretty much is the same thing. You have atom of uranium. When it decays, there's a few different ways, but the one you need for a nuclear reactor is you'll end up with either 2 or 3 neutrons coming off, and it will depend on each decay event as to which number it is. Those 2 neutrons can go on to hit another 2 atoms. Those 2 atoms also give off 2 neutrons each, so now you have 4, and that goes on, and then 8. So, but not all the neutrons will end up hitting another atom and causing a reaction. So what you do is you build your reactor in a way that makes sure that balance is for every decay, you get roughly 1 other atom decaying. And so that way the reactor plant doesn't shoot off into, ridiculously fast reaction rates. And that's
so it's basically like self-replicating.
Yes, and you're just controlling how fast it is. Now, if you want to slow the reactor down, you just stop some of those neutrons from hitting other uranium atoms or plutonium atoms. It works the same. With a nuclear bomb, you need to do the opposite. You don't want to balance. You want it to just go as fast as possible. But to do that, you need to then consider the actual type of material you've got, because the most common element of uranium is 238. When you have heavy elements like that, the bigger numbers tend to be a little more stable, because the neutrons act as glue, but more neutrons you've got, the heavier it is. So uranium-235 is the rarer one, but it's the one that does all this decay.
So when you make
for plutonium doesn't occur
uranium,
naturally, we need to refine it ourselves. We need to make it ourselves.
Yeah. Well, when they make
most
weapons-grade
nuclear
uranium,
bombs
they
are made from
basically
plutonium.
they enrich it. They basically make sure there's more 235 uranium in that than you would normally have in nature.
Yeah.
And by having that higher chance uranium that will split, you've got more chance of getting a sustained reaction. Whereas in a nuclear power plant, you don't have to enrich the uranium because
or at least not to the same degree.
Not to
With a
the
nuclear
same
bomb, it's pretty much close to 100% of your more reactive one. So either pretty much 100% plutonium or 100% uranium-235. The numbers, remembering the specific numbers, not too important. It's just
and it's
you've
not
got more
a
reactive
lot of
ones.
massive
There's no chance I'm
plutonium.
remembering any of those. I'll have to watch it.
Yeah, it's not a huge mass of plutonium or uranium actually in a bomb.
It's a couple of kilos.
Yeah.
The actual detonation at Hiroshima removed about 1 kilo of mass and converted into energy. So that gives you E = mc squared, just how powerful that is. It's about 1 kilo of
not directly to energy, because fission's not as the fission's not as efficient as fusion or antimatter annihilation. No. But yeah, you probably get about an 80% for fission. It's about that.
It depends, because you got a few different.
It depends on the chain, because the different chains, you'll lose neutrons. You'll also lose in other elements that you create, plus other particles that are created. So it depends on the chain. So
yeah, I should have added, when this occurs, when you have one of those neutrons smacking into another atom, it does roughly split in half. So instead of just getting something slightly lighter, you end up with the two elements, and I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but they're both radioactive, and then they'll go on to slowly decay over time. And all those other steps is where the nuclear waste problem comes into, but we can discuss that a bit later. However, you can't turn a nuclear reactor, like the uranium in there, into a nuclear bomb, because it's almost 2 orders of magnitude too impure to do that. It's about 2-3%, or it really depends on the reactor.
It's not as heavily enriched.
Yeah, close to the 100%.
And if you have a thorium reactor, it's hardly enriched at all, because the natural levels of the isotopes required for thorium to do the chains actually almost appear in nature. So you don't have to enrich. It's one of the things that makes thorium so such a good option for the future of nuclear reactors, because A, there's more thorium than there is uranium or plutonium, and B, you don't have to enrich it, and you don't end up with weapons grade materials off the back end of it, which means you can put thorium reactors anywhere and no one's going to make nuclear weapons out of it.
Which is also what I would advocate for. I'm not advocating for a nuclear reactor that can also make nuclear weapons. It's not what we want.
No. You want to have that balance. Now, we do have a $5 super chat from friend of the channel, Digital Demonic Davros. Did you know they use styrofoam in thermonuclear devices? It's news to me.
Yeah, he's added after that research Shallow Earth.
Yes, I was going to I've got no idea, so I was just going to find out, is that accurate? I'm going to go by the look on the faces, maybe not. Research Shallow Earth.
They used all sorts of things. It's quite possible. I mean, some of the early bombs that they were experimenting with used balsa wood to hold the charges in place before they set them off. So yeah, they can use anything. It's just about getting your amount of conventional weapon, conventional explosive charge right to bring your atoms together for a critical mass to start the reaction.
Yeah, one of the really early reactors that used a nuclear bomb core that came out of the Manhattan Project. They basically just had the sphere of the blob or sphere of uranium, and then just had lead bricks, and they just piled the bricks up, and the lead would reflect some of the neutrons. So the higher you made the pile either side, it sped up or slowed the reactor, and you would have someone standing there and moving the brick.
Not safe.
No, it wasn't. And one of the professors there who'd done so much work did actually lose his life because during a demonstration on how to do this, he accidentally dropped one of the bricks over the top and completely sealed it. And the other people in the room described seeing a very bright blue flash, which is the color of the radiation from a nuclear reactor. They're not green, but I think most people here probably heard that one by now.
Radiation.
But
I think that's how you say
the witnesses say he jumped on top of the reactor to shield the other people, and he died several days later from radiation poisoning, but nobody else did.
Oh, wow.
So he jumped on top of it and managed to pull the brick off. So there's
like
so many stories from
grenade,
that. But
I guess.
yeah, he put himself in the way to do that. And then only it was like a couple of months later, a second accident of a similar nature occurred where they used to, by now they weren't using bricks to do it. They had at the actual spheres of plutonium, 2 hemispheres, and they would separate them with a screwdriver. And somebody actually was doing that, and they slipped with the screwdriver and they came together, and it was a similar story. They didn't blow anything up because it wasn't a nuclear bomb, but that was the early days. We're talking 40s, 50s era.
And Ted's just named the core for you and corrected me because it's Chernobyl radiation.
Yes, it is it's the demon core.
Yeah.
It got Ted. That name after the first guy, and then I think it was the same one.
Ted in the chat. Ted's good with this stuff.
Oh, Ted's going to correct us heaps during this because this is his field.
So apparently, Davros has sent us all an article to show how correct he is, and I'm half scared it's a Guardian article.
Yeah, it'll be Guardian.
If it's in the Guardian, we all know that that's better than academic research. So I'll ask a question straight off the bat. Maybe it's one I should have asked earlier, considering where all the discussion at the moment about net zero, how we're going to get to that, and nuclear being brought up. Do you both think that nuclear is, I guess, A, a good option, B, the best option, or C, just shouldn't be considered?
It should be definitely considered, and 100% is one of the solutions, but it is one of many. It should not be our only priority, but it should be one of many paths that will get us to zero emissions. And we should be aiming for that as soon as possible, because the longer we wait, the more damage we're going to do. And the more damage we do, the more it's going to hurt economies, it's going to hurt people, it's going to destroy the environment as well. Like, I don't think I need to sit here talking about why we need zero emissions, but if we want to get down to that cleanest possible path as soon as possible, it can't just be solar or wind or any of that. It has to be a combination, and that's going to probably include nuclear in places where it's appropriate. Australia is quite a good place where it is appropriate because we have
we're lucky. We are really the lucky country. Yeah, well, we are the lucky country here because we have environments for all of those. We've got great environments for wind. We've got great environments for solar. We've got great locations for putting nuclear power plants and the thorium and uranium resources to power those power plants.
Don't we have the biggest uranium reserves in the world?
We do. Yes, we also have the largest thorium.
I think we have about 40% of the world's uranium.
Yeah, and we've got about, like that. I think we've got something like 60% of the world's thorium.
I wonder China.
It's enormous.
I think the next biggest set of deposits after Australia is like South Africa, but when you look at the percentages, we have a lot. But I will say that on top of that, some of it probably we should acknowledge we're not going to access it because it is under national park. And on top of this, I will also advocate for that we need to also develop mining techniques that are not so destructive. We need to be able to get to it without ripping the earth to pieces in the meantime, because it's no point trying to build new reactors if we end up doing more damage to fuel them. But this is why we should be putting money into research for all of this at the same time, because we can't just sit back with the current technology and be like, it's giving us energy. No, we need to
I mean,
be moving
there's
forward,
lots of
and we need
arguments
to
on the
become
two sides.
experts in certain areas.
Nuclear waste is one of the big arguments you'll get. The waste products that you get off nuclear reactors, and people complain about that. But
so explain nuclear waste.
Okay. So in the process of splitting these atoms down, you get lighter elements. And some of these lighter elements don't break down fast into anything smaller and more stable, and they stay as radioactive isotopes for either short periods of times, medium lengths of times, or really, really long amounts of time. Most of the really long amounts of time ones aren't actually as bad as people think they are, because things that take 200,000 years to fully decay actually don't give off a lot of radiation in comparison to other things. So you might be getting maybe 4 times normal dose if you happen to walk in a room with a brick of it in there, but it's not going to kill you. Your problems are those short range ones, that anything up to 100 years of half-life, because anything at that range is emitting so many particles on a regular basis that you start irradiating things around it, and that's deadly.
And
to us.
Also to add on top
things
of
like cadmium and
cadmium's one of the main
we can't
ones.
just launch into the
cadmium's
sun
one of the
like
main
Superman
ones.
style, or
it's actually incredibly difficult to launch things into the sun, although it is easier to launch them into Jupiter. So
I don't know. I think you just point it that way, and the gravity will do the rest.
Jeff's just given us a $5 super chat. The prospect of nuclear mutated Australian wildlife is too scary.
5 pounds.
I think, given how much uranium is already under Australia, that's how we got our wildlife.
Yeah. It's why Australia is so warm. We've got
so much uranium under it. The drop bears naturally just mutated on their own.
Actually, in Africa, there is remnants of a geologically naturally occurring reactor that occurred.
It lasted for about a couple of thousand years. It ran for on its own.
Naturally occurring.
All the conditions just ended up being perfect to run a nuclear reactor in the earth. It was just a lucky combination of all the materials you need. And it probably wouldn't have produced energy in the same sense that ours do.
But it would have warmed up the area. There was probably a few hot springs around there.
So don't let the religious ones find out about that, because that'll be their next evidence for a higher being.
Yes, decided to build a nuclear
God made nuclear power for us. Intelligent design made nuclear power.
We all know it was really the aliens. They've just left it behind. All right, so nuclear waste. So what's the solution for nuclear waste? What do we do?
Fire it into the sun. No, Jupiter.
Cool.
No.
So we're.
There's a thing about nuclear waste in that the early reactors created a lot more nuclear waste than modern reactors, and that's got to do with the technologies that was used in doing them. More modern reactors are called fast breeder reactors, and they actually keep the things like the cadmium inside the reaction chain and actually reprocess them in the heat and everything of the usually salt-based reactors now that they've started using for it, because the closed loop in the salt reactor is actually better for it. Yeah, and I know Matt's researched this, so he should really take over from me.
well, actually, I just wanted to point out the salt-based reactors, what that's referring to is that they do these nuclear reactions in a vat of liquid salt. If something goes wrong, like they operate at very high temperatures.
You're talking about salts that are running up at around 1200 degrees Celsius. They are really, really hot.
If something goes wrong, the reaction shuts down and the temperature drops and the salt just solidifies and just encases everything back up. So you don't end up with it's a fail-safe mechanism that helps protect from meltdowns or disasters.
Well, you can't have a meltdown in these sort of reactors. It just doesn't happen. Well, one of the problems with earlier reactors like Chernobyl was all the fluid that's in them to keep with the cooling and everything is all that really, really high pressure, like 100 plus atmospheres of pressure. This stuff is at, and if it gets boiled or made too hot, it gets even. The pipes eventually can no longer contain them. That wasn't the only problem with Chernobyl, but it was part of the problem.
It was built in the Soviet Union. And
there are reactors in the US built the same way.
The problem was, that's why you don't build Chernobyl-type reactors, although there is still about 10 of them in operation today.
Surely they've corrected the issue, though.
They have. They've all had major safety overhauls, including 2 procedures.
Yes. Procedures was the biggest problem.
Yes. Well, actually, there was 2 major problems: procedures and the actual build of the reactor. But we can get to Chernobyl a bit later. I think
let's talk Chernobyl, because I mean it's.
I did want to add one more onto waste though first. Yeah. On top of. Yeah, so you do need to store the waste, but it doesn't actually take a lot of like actual solid material that you need to put between the waste and other people before it protects it. Although that's also considering that different decay products will give you different types of radiation. The most common ones you hear about are alpha, beta, and gamma. Alpha is the most dangerous, but it goes the least distance. Your skin, the dead skin cells on your skin will stop it. So you can actually sit alpha emitters on you. I wouldn't recommend doing it for any length of time, but it won't do a lot of damage. But if you ingest it, you're in trouble, because then it starts basically ripping you apart from the inside. It was the recent movie Kate, I think, uses that in part of it. There's also it's also what you see in some of the other nuclear movies that don't do it too badly. I think K-19, The Widowmaker, as weird as Harrison Ford and Liam Neeson trying to do Russian accents was, the way they depict the radiation poisoning is not too bad. And that's sort of thing. But then you get other radiation types like gamma is gamma rays. It'll go through quite a lot, so it's less likely to interact with you. It's less dangerous, but it also gets through more, and that's where you kind of need the lead shielding. And if you go for X-rays, they're shorter wavelengths and not as much energy, but you also use similar, kind of lead shielding. If you've ever had an X-ray, you'll know that the guy stands behind a glass booth, which is lead lined
with a lead chest plate on. And
I've had those
semi-naked, and you go, yeah. No.
It's
only because they're there all day and they experience them.
MRIs are much safer.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of radiation, but there's not much danger to an X-ray because the actual amount of radiation you get is very minimal. And that actually is a good way to finish this up, is that not only do you have to consider what type of radiation you're getting, but you have to consider how much, because your body deals with radiation all the time and is quite capable of dealing with small amounts of radiation pretty much constantly. It has to. We live in the universe. The universe is fairly hostile to us. There's radiation all around. So it's about balancing those levels. In fact, you actually get exposed to more radiation standing next to a modern day coal power plant than you do standing next to a modern day nuclear reactor, because the amount of shielding they have is to the point where we can block it. So when it comes to storage, it's mainly about finding
every week. You get exposed to if you're a business person who, say, flies around the world, flies between countries every week or regularly, you are actually, over a term of year, are going to be exposed to as much radiation, because at the height you're flying at, you're actually being exposed to more radiation. So, it's one of those things.
Going into space, maybe not.
Well, it is a concern with astronauts who do a lot of trips into space. They actually do monitor it, because they do. But
they do have shielding on a lot of those on the spacecraft and the satellites that blocks enough of it that it isn't a huge problem, or shouldn't be a huge problem. But you still monitor it, because you always want to err on the side of caution. And not only, so I think the major problem with storage is the long-term aspect. You need to be able to store it in containers that don't break down. Actually building them is not necessarily the hardest bit. It's storing them safely,
and the quantity is not a problem either.
Yeah, the quantity is.
People think about we've got all these huge amounts of nuclear waste in the world. The entire stockpile of nuclear waste in the US since they started using nuclear reactors would fit in a football field, a US-sized football field. And because there isn't, it's still a lot, but in the scheme of things, it's not a huge amount. And with the
you can deal with the volume. And remember, we're not
it's-
advocating for this as a permanent solution. This
No.
would be to keep us online, keep us going, with the goal of eventually switching over to 100%, renewables, and maybe even fusion in the long run, which does not produce any nuclear waste.
Yeah.
So that's the other one. Fusion was what
I
the
hate
sun
it when
does.
people say that, Matt, because that's not strictly true. You do get irradiated parts within the reactor from doing fusion reactions, because there is still radiation that emits from the reactor itself. So the reactor at some point would have to be decommissioned, and you'd have to deal with the irradiated parts.
Oh yeah, no. But it doesn't leave radioactive waste.
It doesn't.
But it does produce radiation when you're running it. In fact, one of my professors, his PhD was in simulating how to stop the metal walls of a fusion reactor expanding by 40%, because the radiation coming off it has so much energy, it can knock atoms out of place and they bounce around and end up somewhere else. And after a while, it ends up messing with the whole structure. So you end up, I think his was about how you put heavier metal or heavier elements in the wall of the container, and it bounces the particles back into where they are. It was quite cool to listen to, but
in the chat, sorry.
Oh, yeah, go.
Yeah, I was just saying in the chat, I've just seen something interesting, and you were tagged in it, Matt. But
yeah, I can see.
Is that right? Like that a coal power
that wouldn't
station
surprise me, because there's, from memory, I don't think there is much in the way of control of radiation from coal power plants. Remember, we're digging materials up out of the ground. There is still radioactive elements in the coal.
We burn them, it gets into the atmosphere.
Yes, and it gets sprayed. And remember, as I said,
there was a particular seam of coal that there's a particular seam of brown coal that they went through that was laced with cadmium through the coal line, and they just burnt it. So you ended up with this cadmium getting in, which is one of the worst things you get out of a nuclear reactor.
If you actually add up the number of deaths caused by each power source in the world, coal is like 10 times worse than the next most dangerous thing from memory. But coal is, I do remember 100% coal is the most lethal coal power generation per kilowatt hour. It's not that we have more coal power plants, but when you consider what causes death. So yes, though in Australia, it is still the cheapest electricity source. I'm not going to get into the politics of why, other than it's already set up here. But
and that
it
is
also
probably
the most
next
dangerous
argument we have. The next discussion we have to look at is where people are talking about the cost per megawatt hour of producing different types of electricity.
Yes, that's why I'm not giving specific numbers, because they range in nuclear from about 4 to 90 per. Is it gigawatt hour? I'm trying to remember the exact unit, but there's a big range depending on.
No, it's worse than that. I think the nuclear range for cost per megawatt hour for a nuclear goes from anything from about 50 American dollars per gigawatt hours to one estimate that I said saw is $235 US per gigawatt hours, and I go, yeah. Yeah, and you've got part of the problem is most of these reports are industry led. So there's not a lot of independent scientific research that's been done on the cost per value of things, because it doesn't matter to most scientists, because they're just in it for the science itself. So the only people who care about it are the industries themselves. So you get reports commissioned by the renewable energy sector, and they will say one thing and put things out one way, and you get ones commissioned by the nuclear energy sector, and they'll go definitely far or the other way. And you've got to, somewhere in the middle of that, you've got to find out what the truth is. And it is an immense problem when you're trying to discuss what's better for us in the long term. So rather than talking about the cost per megawatt hour, which is definitely going to be cheaper in the long run for renewables as the technology gets better, I would rather talk about some of the challenges we'd have with going all renewables, because there are definitely challenges there, and it's one of the reasons why we have to look at a broad range. Now, I know that in the arguments we had online, Sam suggested that, we've already got these coal-fired power stations. Why don't we just keep using them as our backups whilst we get our renewables up to scratch? And I guess you could, but your problem with that is you're still burning coal. And that's not going to help us get to this net zero, not in any foreseeable future. And that's the problem I have. So you need to get something else that's not pumping CO2s and other gases into the atmosphere, that's going to take over from those coal-fired power stations at the same time as we're putting more renewables into the system. And nuclear is really the only option we have for that. There aren't really any other options that we have within Australia. We don't have a whole heap of lakes and stuff like that we can dam, and rivers we can dam and create extra hydroelectric power stations and stuff like that. I mean, we could make tidal systems, but I mean, they're still renewables. But tidal systems ruin the ecology of shorelines. There's no doubt about that. We destroy our shorelines by putting tidal power systems in.
And that's something we definitely don't want to do.
No, we don't. Not here. You imagine we're already destroying our shorelines with global warming. Let's just speed it up by putting nuclear power plants as tidal power plants. No, I don't think it's a viable option. Not when we have wind and solar as good options for us in this country. But wind and solar are not going to cut it on their own. Part of the problem is that they're transient. Solar power only generates during the day. So at night time, where are you getting your power from? Oh, that's all right. We can have big banks of lithium batteries.
And we've seen a lot of places where they've got, like, say, South Australia, where they've got the big renewables. How often they're actually relying on electricity then coming in from other states when the renewables, don't live up to it.
Oh, we haven't had any downtime. Yeah, but how often have you had to supplement your grid from Victoria?
Exactly.
Because it's there in the paperwork. It's why they improved the links between them and the Victorian power grid, so that they could have that extra supplement. So they're grabbing it from coal, but it's not. Well,
it's like here in the ACT, we've got 100% renewable energy, except for the stuff that comes in from New South Wales. But that's not here, so it's...
You only need to look at a map to realize why that's a little odd. But the thing I was going to add on to Jen is that I also don't I agree that we can do that. We can have these power banks, we can have solar power, but it can't be the only thing that we do.
No.
And in some areas, particularly more remote, when you don't want to have to ship your power out over huge lines, that's a good solution. And on individual things, to power like buildings and have the panels close, I think is probably our best use for it. But and also there's a lot of research going into these batteries. I know people who are personally, some of my friends who are doing this research amongst the thousands of other people around the world who are also working on it. And there's a lot of prospects. But at the end of the day, we are limited by the laws of physics and chemistry. We are relying on chemical energy to run these. You have to store it and then you have to get it back. And so that's why lithium, because it's one of the in terms of ripping the electrons off and putting them back on, it's one of the best ones for this.
It's so whenever people show you throw, incredibly volatile. So
yes, if you throw lithium as a solid into water, it's the one that fizzes up and gives you a nice reaction. And there's all these videos out there that show you what happens as you start going down that first column of the periodic table, getting more and more dangerous. They're lies. In terms of energy per gram, lithium is still number one. And I've actually seen some of them where they'll drop it into a bathtub and the bathtub explodes, but you can see wiring coming out of the bathtub. Why would you wire for something that should blow? You got dynamite in there. So that's funny. I always find that odd, but at the end of the day, we can only get so much electrical potential out of the elements we've got. You get to the end of the day where, yes, we can improve it, we can keep going, and I'm all for that, but chemical storage for energy is not very efficient by its nature.
And then, of course, we have things where you use like potential storage where you're using gravity to store it. So you pump water into a tank.
I find very fascinating.
They are brilliant. They're brilliant storage systems. We have some brilliant technologies for storage systems. There's one where there's a molten salt storage system. I know we were talking about molten salts for nuclear reactors before, but the molten salt storage system is that they actually use microwaves to heat up salt to a molten point, and then in the night grab the heat back off it to turn a turbine. your problem with this is your energy loss. To start with, solar cells are not particularly efficient monsters. Most of our cells, you're lucky if you get 46% efficiency at the commercial range. You can get slightly better ones, but they generally don't build them out.
I was in a group that worked on
this is your
solar
field.
cells.
Yeah, this is your field.
So what my honors year, I worked on an area called Polariton lasing, and it was with a group that did a lot of work on these things called excitons, which is basically a positive charge and a negative charge that is still coupled, which basically means they're still attracted to each other.
Yeah.
And the way solar cells work is to do that, because what you end up with is you layer the materials so that when you get the sunlight coming in, hits it, that energy from your photon or photons, I'll get to why you might use plural for this later, will create that difference. You'll end up separating an electron from where it would normally like to sit. But you put something in the middle so they can't just go back together, and then you put wires on the end so that the only way they get back together is to flow through the wires, and that's how you get electricity out of it. You could connect it to a battery or a generator or whatever you want to do, so not like a turbine, something that you can use the energy for. But when you consider that which photons can actually do that, it's only generally a narrow range because you need them to have enough individual energy. And when you look at the sun, one of the in terms of photons coming off it, the biggest color we get is actually green. We get more green photons than anything.
We actually have a green sun, believe it or not.
Yes.
Okay.
But we don't actually utilize it very well. Plus the red end. So one of the big problems with particularly all the semiconductor solar panels, which is the ones you'd see, there's not really, at least commercially available solar cells that aren't made from semiconductors. It's different. You make them out of different types, but I won't get into that because that's not something I'm too familiar with. But I lost track of my thoughts. That's not good.
Uh-oh.
Let's get into that. Making...
And it was going to be something really good too, wasn't it?
It was, and I've remembered it.
I've got
Don't worry, I come back.
Okay, go on.
It was about it's about these colors. So when you have all these different wavelengths hitting it, only some of them have enough energy to create electricity. So you end up a lot of them get absorbed and go to heat. We don't want that, or getting reflected off if there's reflective surfaces, which you're going to have. There's a change in refractive index anyway, but that's separate. Particularly if you're coating them in glass or plastic or something.
Yeah.
But a lot of that is not used. But one of the areas that they're trying to do is actually use dyes that will take two, say, red photons and combine them into a higher energy green or blue photon, or I've even seen purple, which is quite cool. And those have much more energy, and those are easy. So what you do is use an extra layer of dye. It's cool. But even then, when it comes to solar cells, and even when it comes to the organic stuff, which is one area of research when I was working with that group, they also had they had projects that were not mine, but I got to see them occurring. They work on organics, but even then you've still got efficiency problems just by the nature of the system. So there's uses, but we have to temper that with, there always are going to be limitations. So until we can do this efficiently enough that those, mass produce it at a cheap enough cost that those limitations don't matter, we need other things in the meantime.
Yeah.
Now, I did see an interesting point in the chat here from Peter. Good to see you as well, Peter. Just a point, we have had an active operating nuclear reactor operating since 1958, and it hasn't gone bang. That would be Lucas Heights.
Yeah.
Yes, Anster. Yeah. One of my mates visits it fairly regularly, or at least sends samples off regularly.
I used to quite literally live on the other side of the valley. So you've got Anstow at Lucas Heights, then you'd have the valley and there's Engadine, which is where I was. So it was, we'd look at it and we'd often say, well, if it's going to go, at least it'll be quick.
We need it for nuclear medicine.
Yes, which is the other thing, is if you build nuclear reactors, you can not only make medical products or medical isotopes like the molybdenum-99 that gives you the technetium-99, that's one of the more common ones, which is used for, I think, cancer diagnosis, amongst other things. But you can also use it for research. You can study new systems. If you want to, in fact, this is actually one of the things about it. If you want to study energy storage with batteries and you want to study new chemical, like crystal structures, you send them to ANSTO. You send them to places like that and you run radiation through it to see how, the radiation bounces through it. And that tells you what the structure's going on, which tells you whether, how to make your batteries, or at least one aspect of it. None of this is in isolation. So if you want to actually improve research into solar cells, having a nuclear reactor is potentially very
great
useful.
idea.
That's the way to go.
The other side of what you were talking about before with solar cells is that, like most things in science, if things work in one way, it works the other way. If you actually apply a current, if you put a current through a photoelectric cell, it'll actually glow like an LED. So you can actually run them in the opposite direction, because things that happen one way generally work in reverse.
Always got a light handy to point.
Or actually, this is probably how these. Oh no, that's the green one.
That's a good way to.
It's a green screen.
That's your green one, isn't it?
There's a purple one. But that's how they work. This is semiconductors in here that work. It's not the same, but it's a similar process. It's a similar process,
too.
So
it's kind of interesting, but the thing is the efficiency of these things, like even our wind turbines, because it's not windy all the time everywhere. So wind turbines and solar panels, we can't have them generating energy all the time. Then we're looking at storage systems.
And wind turbines kill birds.
Yeah.
That's a bit,
Yeah, that birds do get used to them being there, though. One thing
birds
people
are very
don't understand
smart.
about wind turbines, people tend to think,
birds.
this is a windy area. Let's build hundreds of wind turbines there. For the wind to turn the wind turbine, the turbine actually takes some of the energy out of the end. So the wind that comes out the other side of the turbine is actually moving slower than the wind that entered the turbine. Conservation of energy. So at the end of a great big long line of towers, you end up with virtually no wind coming out to the end one, so they generate less power. So there's a limit to how many wind turbines you can actually put in an area. And not only that, when we're doing that, we're actually changing how the environments work in those areas. And we don't know how that's affecting the wildlife and the plant life in the areas where we put them. We do the same things when we build
research.
That's why we need the researcher. And that's the same with solar panels. In some respects, I think solar panels are excellent because they're highly reflective generally, they're as almost as reflective as they are absorbing of the sun's rays and that. So we're actually getting a bit of a heat reduction by using solar panels for the Earth. So it's having this double effect of we're reducing emissions, which is going to help stop the Earth from getting too warm. But the solar panels themselves are also helping to stop the sun warming us up so much. So they're actually kind of a cool thing in that respect. But depending on where you put them, you can change what the environment is like in that area. So like in Australia, where we're used to having deserts which get really hot because of the sun on them, and we suddenly put solar panels and we're reducing the temperatures in those areas, we are going to change how those areas work by the amount of solar panels we put in. So if we create big enough solar farms that are going to supply all the need, we actually could do as much environmental damage to the planet as climate change itself does. So now, because we're creating a local climate change in that sense, and that could be just as bad because the research on these long-term effects is very much in its infancy. So we're going, yes, this is going to work. This is going to work. Yeah, well, we need time to know that what level we can do these things for. Hopefully, that's not going to be a problem at all, but it may be, and we should be more careful now than ever than what we have been in the past with other things. Now we know that the negative effects from having nuclear power plants is the waste product we're going to have from it, because modern nuclear power plants are very unlikely to have a meltdown, very unlikely to do a Chernobyl, which Matt's going to talk about in a bit. And
if we
build relatively safe
the way that they're meant to be built,
we build them, they will come. No,
it won't be physically possible.
Sadly, I was thinking exactly the same thing then, Jim.
But yeah.
Now, there is something you've been corrected in the chat, Matt, and I just want to point that out. Paul Camish has said, if birds are very smart, why do we call dumb people bird brains? Checkmate.
He's got me there, 100%. Yeah. It's not as though we've ever had sayings or misconceptions about nature.
No, checkmate.
Depends on the bird. Some birds are as dumb as, and some birds, like magpies, are quite intelligent.
I hate magpies.
We have magpies that feed on our back veranda. They had twins this year, as I found out this morning.
Wow.
So they brought the babies into the tree in our backyard.
Let's hope your cat doesn't eat them.
We don't have a cat.
You saw a cat.
Yeah, there are cats around, but they can all fly now, so...
The cats?
Not the cats.
No, not the cat.
Well, cats can fly. You play helicopter with them. You spin them around a few times and let go.
Yeah, hence the phrase, not enough room to spin a cat. It's like, what do you mean? Look, plenty of room.
I love cats so much that I live in a suburb.
Yeah, I've got a great background for that now.
So
spinning the cat. There's not enough room to spin a cat in this reactor.
So let's talk Chernobyl. Well, I guess there's the three prominent ones. I guess 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. Let's talk Chernobyl because that's probably the best known, and certainly I would say the one that caused correct me if I'm wrong, the most damage or the greatest impact on humans, certainly.
It's the largest nuclear accident to ever occur. And I say accident because we've definitely released more radiation deliberately through all the nuclear bomb tests. But in terms of accidental nuclear breakdowns, that's the worst. In terms of the environmental impact and also the social impact in terms of affecting people's minds, it is also quite clearly number one. I won't get into... okay, so I need to explain a tiny bit about how the Chernobyl reactor was built compared to other reactors. Now,
you might as well have
one of the main components...
He knows all about this.
Okay. One of the main components you need in a nuclear reactor to maintain that balance I mentioned earlier is a moderator. If your neutrons that are coming off, when your atom splits and you get 2 or 3 of them come off, if they're moving too fast, they won't react. They won't actually interact with another atom. So to stop the reaction just petering out, you put something in to slow them down. Most reactors, and this is even what the Nazis were trying, although they know their nuclear reactor actually wouldn't have worked even if they had anything to put in it, is heavy water. So basically you take hydrogen, you add an extra neutron to it, so you double its weight, but you don't really change the chemical properties that much. There's some quantum effects, but not really anything chemical. And if you do that to the 2 hydrogens on water, you end up making it a bit heavier, which is why it's called heavy water. Now, it's a brilliant moderator because if your reactor starts speeding up, you get more energy, the water heats up, and it starts to essentially bubble or boil. You end up, they're called voids, but it's basically a bubble. Now, that means there's less moderator there, so the radiation has basically less moderator, and it slows down because there's less stuff to make sure that the neutrons are traveling at the right speed. But heavy water is very expensive to produce. So the Soviet Union was like, expensive? No, let's find another way around it. So instead, they made the moderator out of graphite, which works as a good moderator, but that meant that they just put regular water in the power plant. So because you need to keep them cooled. So most power plants use the heavy water as a coolant as well, and you keep it flowing through. So this one, they just replaced it with regular water and then put graphite in there. The type of reactor was a Reactor Bolshoi Mashasnovsky Kanalny reactor, which is an RBMK or high power channel reactor, if someone wants to look them up for more detail. And so you have them in kind of like channels, and you have the water flooding through that. There's a slight problem. Well, there was a big problem with the way that works. And on the day that the disaster happened, a few things went wrong during the day, then in the evening when they ran the test. So during the day, there was an exceptionally high demand for power. So the reactor was running at a higher rate than it normally would. Now, every now and then they decommission the reactors briefly just to do safety checks and to make sure they're all good. And it was due to be shut down that evening. So the engineers during the day were like, well, we want to check one of the safety aspects of the reactor. So why don't we do that while we're shutting it down? So what they decided is they'd run a test that the plant, the pumps that were running the water through and keeping everything cool were also powered by the nuclear reactors. And there's 4 cores in the Chernobyl building. And they decided to test this with one of them. Core number 4, I believe it was. And so they're like, there should be enough momentum in the turbines that even as the reactor slows down, the energy left over will keep the pumps running until the backup generators come on. So they decided to shut down all the safety procedures to do with the pumps and the flow of water. Then, in the evening when they went to run their test, at midnight, the engineers changed hands. So, like, the shift changed. So the new engineers did not know that during the day the plant had been running for a long time, which meant that there was a buildup of a lovely element called xenon, which in a nuclear reactor is known as a poison because it basically slows the reactor down. It absorbs neutrons very, very well. Water also absorbs neutrons very well, not heavy water, but regular water. So when they tried to do their test and they wanted to power the reactor down, because you don't turn them off, can't really do that. Instead of the power just dropping a little bit, because they needed, I think it was like 400 joules per. I can't remember the exact units, but it was about 400. It was about 800 they needed for the test, and the plant dropped to about 100. Like, just the power just cut off because there was all this extra poison running around. So to get it running again, they decided to grab all of the control rods, which is what's absorbing neutrons and stopping them getting out of hand, and pull them all out of the reactor. So they just hit all the switches and pulled all the control rods back out, and the reactor started getting up. As the power plant started rerunning again, it started burning off the xenon and it started heating the water. As the xenon got burnt off, the reactor started getting warmer and warmer. They got it back to about 800 and decided to do their test. What happened very shortly after that when they tried to run the test was, as they tried to shut it down, they shut the water pumps down. So the water stops flowing. That meant that the water that was sitting in these channels started heating and you started getting the bubbles or voids. So there's now gaps. So because they're good at absorbing neutrons, as the gaps form, you have less and less water. Less neutron absorption, the reaction gets faster. They also by now had burnt off most of the xenon. So the reactor just went all the way up. None of this should have happened, and this is why we don't build reactors like this. And from memory, 23 past 1, about 30, they hit the emergency shutdown. And here was another problem with the way the Russians had built it, is that all the control rods, which are meant to help slow the reaction down, in this case, the emergency shutdown should have stopped it. It was basically an emergency drop that would take, I think it took about 20 seconds, or was meant to. They put moderator on the tips of these control rods. So as the rods started moving down into where you had water, which was absorbing some of these neutrons, you now replaced it by moderator, which made it faster. And they reckon it, and at the very bottom of the reactor, so once they hit the emergency button, there was nothing they could do. The plant was going to explode because of everything stated up to this point. So when the tips got down to that end bit down the bottom where it was worse, the reactor just went, I think it went from like 400, and it ticked out and blew the detectors. The power that came off it was so much. They don't actually know what it was, but I think the detector ran out about 30 or 300,000, but they reckon it probably got up to over 3 million. This thing just went out of control. And then there was 2 explosions. The first one lifted the 100-ton concrete lid, it was concrete lid off the reactor. It was also enough to make the 200-kilogram rods start bouncing, and the TV series Chernobyl has a scene for that I actually used in one of my videos. And it was enough, and so there was that first explosion. that meant that air and steam got in, and it probably reacted under that heat with thorium, or some of the, I think it was the thorium left over, or one of the other materials in the reactor, which built up to hydrogen. And at that heat, it just, because now there's oxygen there, hydrogen, oxygen, it just went boom a second time. And conventionally, the understanding is that second explosion was what launched all the nuclear waste upwards. It was a jet of steam that was about 3 kilometers high. And they actually have a good understanding of how much radiation it released, because all the countries around, including Russia, the Soviet Union itself, had stations set up for monitoring radiation fallout from nuclear bomb testing. So they have a pretty good idea of what happened after that point. But yeah, that's not how you build a nuclear reactor. They also shut down all the safety tests. They didn't tell the safety officer in charge they were doing this test anyway. So the people who should have been informed weren't. They then also went ahead with a test that was inherently dangerous. And yes, the pumps that were meant to be controlling this plant were what they shut down. And that was the one thing keeping this type of reactor from going boom. And there's also some evidence and papers I've read fairly recently. So like in the 2000s, this was 89, 86?
86.
It was late 86, yeah. When it went boom.
1986.
Yeah, yes. And the explosion, that suggests that either the first explosion may have been a nuclear explosion. But of course, because the enriching stuff we talked about earlier, you can't get a nuclear bomb-sized explosion, but it was still enough to do serious damage. But there's still, as I said, about 10 of these RBMK-type reactors left in the world, all of them in the former Soviet Union, none of them built after Chernobyl. And in fact, the other 3 cores at Chernobyl were kept running, with the last one not being shut down until 2000, because Ukraine just did not have the money to replace its power generation. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a bit lengthy, but Jen, you're muted.
Yeah, so people bust in and out of the area to run the power plant, even though no one was allowed to live in the area.
Man, you would want to be getting paid some big money for that.
Well, you're in the Soviet
Union, I doubt it.
Yeah. Well, the Soviet Union collapsed 5 years later. I mean,
yes, Ukraine kept running them, but Ukraine didn't have a lot of money to give to people. So,
yeah, this is true.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the politics of the region, but it was that. Yeah, for all those reasons, no modern reactor can have that accident occur, because they are built in a way where it was in Chernobyl. You had the water, you had the graphite, you had the control rods were set up in a way that the reactor could get faster and faster. And the hotter it got, the faster it got. So the faster it got, the hotter it got. Most modern reactors, the hotter they get, the slower they get. That's why you use heavy water. And in fact, there's I forget what the name is. It was actually it was one of the products from, was it Livermore Labs? It's one of the earlier ones where they built a reactor for teaching that only runs for about 30 seconds before those other aspects kick in and it shuts itself down. And it's brilliant for teaching, because you can let students
I've seen footage of Livermore Labs. Yeah, you can actually walk up and you can actually see the blue, because you can stand above it, because it's not actually emitting that much radiation.
Oh, the water they
be in the room and it's on, and you can watch the blue glow of the reactor, which the blue glow of the radiation is just, I'm not going to try and say the name of it again because I always screw it up. Thanks, Ted. It is gorgeous, and it's actually caused by the light that's emitted from the reactor.
Radiation slowing down.
Yeah. Well, it's actually because it starts moving. It starts out moving faster than the speed of light in the medium that it's moving in. So that's why you get that.
I didn't think anything could move faster than the speed of light.
In the medium it's in. In a vacuum you can't, but you can have photons move faster than what the speed of that photon should be in a medium. So like if you've got water, you can actually make a photon in water move faster than what the normal speed of a photon in water would be. And when you do that, you emit blue radiation.
Still not going faster than the speed of light in a vacuum.
No,
it's just
still not going faster than the speed of light in a vacuum, but faster than the speed of light in that.
It's like
medium.
the car is you're speeding
exactly
through your speed zone, but you're not exceeding the top limit for the car.
But it is why warp drives are blue in Star Trek.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Should have a look at that
it's why they make them blue in Star Trek, because they go faster than the speed of light, so it's got to be blue. Despite the fact that when they're moving at impulse speed, they're still blue.
So there is some science in Star Trek.
There is some science in Star Trek. But a lot
they probably just put it in because it looks really cool in the background.
Yeah, it's a Doppler effect blue shift because of that movement. But yes, Ted's right.
So Fukushima, what happened at Fukushima?
Fukushima is a
nuclear plant.
But it's a nuclear accident that wasn't a nuclear power plant problem.
Okay.
Apart from the fact of where they built it.
Yes, you probably wouldn't want to build... And it was also an old plant from memory due to be decommissioned.
Yes.
It was... And that's also why we were saying that in Australia, it's probably a better place to put them, is that we have areas of Australia that are incredibly stable from an environmental point of view. Like, I wouldn't put them in the north of Queensland because I wouldn't want a cyclone coming through. That would be a place for other energy sources, other renewables. But say around some of the major cities further south.
Imagine when you capture.
Sorry?
You could get a wind farm there. Imagine when you capture with that cyclone, you'd power a city.
Australia will take off. Or fly. I know that's a violation of pretty much all of Newton's laws, but hey.
Yeah.
We do have a quick super chat, $1.99 from Vandalia. Good to see you, Vandalia.
Hi, Vandalia.
Haven't seen Vandalia for a while.
Send me the link. I'll have a look at it.
Yeah, it's Vandalia's got some pretty cool podcasts out there. Anyone who hasn't subscribed to Vandalia should probably subscribe to Vandalia because there's some really, really cool stuff that he does.
I'm surprised you haven't been a guest yet, Matt.
I don't think we've met, so that might explain it.
You generally, you do need to know first, but
you need to know of someone before you can actually interact.
That's true.
So, oh well.
Well, I mean, you are pretty famous now.
Yeah, you're almost a doctor, too.
Yeah. Look, it's only a matter of time before you go viral. You know that. You know that. It's going to happen. So, you know.
People have said that for a while, but we'll see. I still like Ted's idea. We got to come up with a really crazy name for a video about what is it? So, like do a space one about a probe smashing Uranus.
Oh,
that was the idea that came up for. But because if you label
a probe into Uranus,
you need to put a political spin on it if you really want it to go viral.
Yeah, but I know you, so that'll just get me cancelled.
Causes leftist tears or something. I mean, people will love it.
I so want the headline now that NASA plans to smash a probe into Uranus.
Oh, it has to happen.
Won't that be great?
They will. I mean, they will probably do it one day because they've done it in most of
to study the gases.
Planet.
It's a long way to send a probe, though. It is like I mean, sort of Jupiter.
Would that count as anal probing, though?
It would, yes. And that's how we get demonetized.
Sorry, I can't believe I was the one who started this, not Jen.
Yeah, but
and it took an hour to get there.
I think you spent too much time with Jen. I think that's the problem. You spent enough time with Jen. I was about to say she rubs off on you, but that could be taken the wrong way.
No.
You still said it.
Yeah, I know. I did. I did. Can't help myself. I'd spent too much time with Jen. So,
yeah, just blame me.
So I guess
I was probably already a little bit like that before I met Jen. So don't worry.
Just brought out the inner evil in you. So I guess to get back on track, and we'll wrap it up because we've gone over the hour mark, but from very much a simpleton's understanding, the reason that things like Chernobyl had issues were because of a lack of heavy water, I saw as the main. But basically, it didn't have the right safety protocols. It wasn't built.
We were still learning. You've got to remember these were built in the 50s and 60s, and we were still learning, and we were gung-ho. Especially in the Soviet Union, they were gung-ho. But even the US, it's why still had 3 Mile Island. It's why Fukushima was built where it was. We're invincible. We can do what we want. Our attitude now is different. It's why we're looking at things like thorium, salt reactors, fast breeder reactors, which, as Matt and I've already said, basically shut themselves down if you end up with a problem. That they can't go. Well, they shouldn't be able to go. You would really have to try to make them go.
Then some of them they won't. You can try, and as long as you don't actually start dismantling them and rebuilding them in a different way, they can't. Or at least that's not to say that there aren't possible dangers. We still need to be careful. But as I said in the end of the video I did on Chernobyl, that a better understanding of reality, the world that surrounds us, and the safety considerations that we can come from that is never a bad thing. Better we understand what we're doing, the safer we can do it, and the more efficiently.
The benefits are definitely there, and really
for us in Australia, and for us in Australia, we're talking about what we can do in the next 10 years, and we can build a lot of renewables in the next 10 years, and we can build storage systems in the next 10 years, but we are not going to, in the next 10 years, get ourselves close to net zero, and we want to do this by they're saying 2050, but we really need to do it before then. There are options coming up in the future. One of the things that's been worked on for the last at least 10 years has been modular nuclear power plants. Matt actually sent me a link about one of them before we did the stream, and I can't remember what the name of the company is that's working on it. But basically what you've got is that they build the core of the reactor in a thing that would fit on the back of a truck. And these particular cores do about 75 megawatts for a singular core, and they truck them out to where they're going to put the where they're going to build the power plant, and they shove a core and another core and another core, and so many cores up to however many megawatts you want the plant to produce. They're individually self-contained cores. You cannot get into them. They are completely sealed up units. They're designed to run for 60 years. At the end of 60 years, they pick them up, put them on the truck, take them off and decommission them. Offsite, they have decommissioning plants for them and everything like that. They're designed to run for 60 years, and you just build modular power stations where you need them. So they're not a big power station that's got a lot of material in them. So even if you did have a problem, there's not a lot of material inside them. They're all fully self-sealed, so you can't get into them. Nobody can walk into the reactor. Sorry?
So basically it's a mini power station.
Yeah. Basically, it's a truckable power station. So 75 megawatts, you can power a small town with one of those.
You watch the science fiction shows with the mini nuclear reactors in cars and things like that.
They're a bit bigger than that, but
obviously, but as they're getting smaller, that could be, maybe we're living in the future or getting close to it.
Yeah. So these technologies, the first ones of these will become available about mid this decade. They're actually building and testing them, but as a commercial option, they will be available about mid this decade, about the time that we'd start looking at building these power plants in Australia. They're actually an awesome option that they give us 60 years of taking over from coal. Small modular reactors. They give us 60 years approximately, which is enough time for newer technologies and to become available, maybe fusion in that time frame, we don't know, or just having renewables and storage systems at a point where we can start, we can just decommission these and go straight across to renewables or whatever else we're going to go to in the future. This is our stopgap to get us off coal, get us to net zero, and ultimately get Australia where we need to be in the future. And it really is just we need a combined system, and nuclear is our stopgap, because if we continue to use coal as our stopgap, as our pick-me-up from using to back up the renewables, we're just going to keep piling on the emissions, because it becomes a crutch then, and we just, we've got the coal-fired power station. Let's just pump some more coal in there, and we've achieved nothing at that point. We have to move away. We have to say, right, we are going to move away from the coal. So let's get into doing.
It's realistic. We're not going to burn coal forever, are we?
No, and we can't. We have to move across to something else. So these small portable power stations, we can have multiple power stations around, and then in the area where you've got them, these are your fallback systems. You can then start looking at where you can build your renewables that are around them. One of the things people don't understand about why we need the fallback and not just storage is the redundancy in a typical power grid comes around. A lot of it comes around because of the mass of the turbines. You've got these enormous, heavy turbines that are being turned by steam or running water or whatever else. There's a lot of potential energy in that turbine itself, even if the reactor stops burning, or you have a problem within the reactor and you have to temporarily.
Which is what they were trying to test at Chernobyl.
Yeah, that's what they were trying to test. So you want to know that when these turbines keep turning because of the inertia within them, how long that can keep the grid at its stable level, where if we're in Australia, you're at 240 volts. So can it keep the AC current running in a stable thing for long enough that we can kick in backup systems to keep the grid up and running? And that redundancy is built into the turbines themselves. Solar doesn't have that, and neither does wind, because the little turbines on the wind turbines don't have any inertia, have very little inertial backup in that sense. So that's where our reliability comes from, switching into batteries or gravitational fed storage systems. But basically, they're all batteries. They're just different types of batteries. But they still have limitations compared to this inertial system that our entire grid system has been built on. We could change our grid system so that we wouldn't be as reliant on that. But then we'd also have to change all the power adapters in our appliances that we use, and that's not feasible. So we kind of have to have some form of inertial redundancy. Yeah, Ted's right. We're running on primitive technology, and that's part of the problem. It could be so much better if it was done differently. And we will get there. In the next 60 years, we will have better batteries. We'll have better storage systems. We will get all these technologies, and we'll get them because we've invested in nuclear as well as renewables. If we just do renewables, we're going to struggle.
I mean, you look how far we've come in the last 60 years.
Yeah.
But technology is just on this, it's just going sky high. Who knows what we'll have in 10 years? I mean, that's why it's, when people are talking about 2050, it's like we don't know what 2050 is going to look like.
I'm like, why are we planning for this to be so far away? We can do it much better. Well, in most developed countries, we can do it much sooner.
Those small reactors, we could be looking at doing it by 2030 if we go a mixture of renewables and nuclear. It is conceivable we could get to net zero. Well, maybe not by 2030, but so 2035. That's 15 years earlier than the government's actually talking about. And we'd be kicking other people in the other arse about it. We should be looking at that. I think it's doable, but we can only do it if we do
2050 because that's when all the current politicians, they'll all be gone by then, so they don't really care.
Yeah, they don't care. But we could do this. And you go, oh, but what about the jobs in the coal industry? Oh, think of all the new jobs in the nuclear industry.
All the solar, all the wind.
We mine the stuff, all the solar and all the wind and everything. We're not going to lose any net jobs over it. We are not going to we're going to become a more cleverer country because we're investing more in both renewables and nuclear. Because if we come at the head at producing these, if we take the lead and become really good at producing these small transportable nuclear power plants, we can sell them to other countries. And that's a huge, I mean, net gain. At the moment, we're selling them our uranium and our thorium. Why don't we sell them these core reactors that they can just
do them a nice package deal, you reckon?
A package deal. What value add?
You like fantastic furniture.
I think if you look at Australia, I think we need to think about what are the strengths that we have? And we don't have a manufacturing industry, really. It's just too hard because the population for our size is too small for that to be generally feasible compared to other countries, particularly if you look at ones like America where they just have the funds to do it. We don't. Yeah. So I think one of our big advantages is going to have to be kind of, science, technology, be intellectual.
Be the clever country that the Labour Party thought we could be in the 80s and we never achieved. Do it now. So this is what we should have done back then. Be the clever country and do the clever thing and invest in these technologies and build the infrastructure for us, but then sell it to the rest of the world. Because that's what we should be doing. And we can get to net zero. We can achieve what needs to be achieved and do the best for the environment and help other countries achieve it. So we're doing the best for the planet as a whole. And my concern is it'll take us a lot longer to get there if we're just going to concentrate on renewables. It'll take a lot longer to get other countries there if they just concentrate on renewables. But if you do a good set of mixed technologies, we can get there quicker and we could lead the world in that.
Personally, what I think needs to happen is I think all the politics needs to be taken out of this.
Oh, I agree.
I think it just needs to be a bipartisan thing because it's at the moment it's where you stand on certain types of energy depends on, well, not for everyone, but for a lot of people it depends on your political affiliation, which is crazy.
Because it's our backyard. It doesn't matter who you support. We're all going to have to live on this planet, and it doesn't matter which country either. So this idea that, well, these countries aren't obeying or they're taking a longer goal, so we should just, that's their problem. That's not an excuse. If someone next to you is shooting someone else, that doesn't give you an excuse to stab someone.
No,
we should all be trying to move forward. Yeah, well, I mean, maybe I'm biased because I always will say for more research in science.
Oh, look, I think there is a problem where I think countries like China, realistically, until they come on board, it's we can make some difference, but you need those big polluters. I mean, the US is probably the biggest one that absolutely must come on board. They because
and if you're looking at a country like the US, you go, oh, I mean, it's all right for us. Maybe we can get there within renewables by 2050. Maybe with some good gains in science and everything. The rest of the world will not. No. They have too much population to do it. So, especially countries like America and China and that. So, if we lead the development of these technologies, we can sell it back to them. We can sell products to other countries. We shouldn't be buying from them. We should be making these things, and we should be developing, and we should be at the forefront of this. We shouldn't be resting on our laurels and buying shit from other people. We have the scientists here. Let's keep them here by investing in both renewables and nuclear and get us where we need to go.
Sounds good. Well, on that note, I think I might wrap it up. It's been a good stream. I've learned a lot. I've sat here feeling very unintelligent, but I'll just drag you to
Matt does that to me all the time.
Yeah, I'm just going to drag you into a history conversation at some point just to kind of inflate my.
That'll only make me look stupid, not Matt.
Yeah, I know. He knows too much. We need to find something Matt knows nothing about, and spend a stream talking about that. Just to help
I will not be on a stream talking about sport. Oh no, damn it! He gave it away.
Yeah, me neither.
I was thinking that, but that's Jen won't be there for that one.
You and Jeff should talk to Matt about sport. That's what you should do.
Yeah, we'll have a Premier League conversation. We'll discuss the ins and outs of what's going on. It'll be fantastic. All right. Well, thank you everyone who's been watching along. Thank you for the super chats. They certainly do help a lot. Very much appreciated. They go towards running a lot of the things that they're getting. It's all these streaming things. They keep bumping the price up on me. It's like it's crazy. They get you in and they just keep creeping that price up, and then. So any assistance is always appreciated. But thank you for watching. Thank you for learning along with me. Cults and start that again. Cults and Conspiracies is on tomorrow night. I believe Jay is looking at the Branch Davidians. We've got On the Couch on Thursday night if you're in the US, Friday morning if you are in Australia, and of course we have Friday night Six Pack Then on Saturday,
we're talking about Texas and abortion on the couch.
We might have a chat about that. Off air. We'll talk about that off air. Anyway, Saturday is going to be a fun one. Saturday is going to be a really, really fun one because we are watching Kent Hovind's How to Make and Spend Money God's Way. So some classic Kent. We're all going to learn how to make money just like Kent Hovind.
I think you mispronounced that E.
It's the accent. It's on that note.
It's because he's moved to Canberra.
So I've picked up the Toffee Canberra accent here. So it's what can I say? Everyone, have a wonderful evening.
Bye.